You can get this show, in case you're new to it, you can get this show on iTunes, on Stitcher, on Google Play, at cincyjungle.com. We're also on YouTube and Art19. So a lot of different platforms for this show, and we appreciate the support, how you give it to us in those variety of ways. John, Bengals lost to the Browns here, and speaking of Baker Mayfield, we got to go here, John.
Let's go here.
Yeah. I want to get your thoughts on his stare down of Hugh Jackson. And there's a couple of questions I want to ask as follow-up, but we're going to start here. Just when he was doing that, and I didn't actually see it live. I saw it when they panned back and showed him kind of backpedaling and staring back at the sideline. And to be quite honest with you, it wasn't a play that he made that was like a wow throw. It was actually a wow play by Njoku.
Mm-hmm.
But what do you make of that? I mean, I think we all knew going into this, Baker Mayfield was a kind of arrogant guy. He shows a lot of that on the field. He showed it on college tape. To be expected, or is it just specifically because it's Hugh Jackson?
People have a problem with Baker Mayfield because he doesn't play for their team. There's no Browns fans out there that are asking Baker Mayfield to calm it down and kind of hide in the shell, because that's not who he is. That's not how he succeeded as a college quarterback. That's not how he's going to succeed as an NFL quarterback. I guarantee you that if Baker Mayfield played for the Cincinnati Bengals, everybody would want him to do the same exact thing that he's doing with Cleveland. But just because it's against the team that we root for, we certainly have a problem with it. Yes, Mayfield threw a 5-yard pass to Njoku, who then ran 63 yards. But the impact of that play basically led to the Browns having a chance to finish over 500. The Bengals would finish below 500 and be last in the AFC North. And the Bengals just happened to employ the head coach that, again, Hugh Jackson probably didn't have much say in drafting, and then stuck him on the bench for the entirety of training camp and preseason, and then the start of regular season. Baker Mayfield will always try to find the guy to kind of build his mentality around and trying to make the villain so he can kind of conquer him, and that's kind of just the way that he is. So he deemed Hugh Jackson that guy because of the events that transpired towards him, and even after that first Bengal game, he villainized Hugh Jackson, and then essentially the entire city of Cleveland rallied behind him and made Hugh Jackson that enemy to kind of just kind of spark some type of late season run. And then they did all they could to try to make the playoffs. Unfortunately, it didn't work. But then, Mayfield essentially emphasized that with this latest stare down that lasted a few seconds. At this point, Hugh Jackson can't coach against the Browns and not expect to get trolled because of how things ended there. So even if Mayfield doesn't have this much hatred towards Jackson, this is the persona that he's going to bestow upon him in order to galvanize his team and his fan base, and maybe even his coaching staff, to the point, because what they see in Mayfield is a leader and a spark and a culture shift, and that's exactly what that franchise is needed. And there's just no way that we can expect Browns fans to possibly ask him to tone it down. And we just have to have that perspective as another fan base of a rival team, that's just the way that it is, and we're just going to be jealous of it because we don't have it.
So are you, aside from it being at the Bengals' expense, do you have a problem with it? Because
no,
you do not.
I do not.
Okay. Because to me, this is kind of like the bat flip argument in baseball, right?
Oh, for sure.
There are people that find it because this is where we are here. There's kind of two sides of the fence. Talking about baseball, there are people that find that disrespectful, and you're showing up other players, and then there's other people that are like, hey man, this is a sport where the individual spotlight is on you quite often, and when you physically dominate another player, you have a right to celebrate or whatever. So you do not have a problem with it based on what he did. What you have no problem with it. And you think the players should be able to do that? I mean,
yeah.
I guess.
I feel like the fan bases for both football and baseball are similar to the unwritten rules aspect. Whereas with the NBA, there's a much different majority fan base where they're kind of open to players expressing themselves in that way and having these stare downs and having this sort of pettiness kind of take over games at times. And, with both football and baseball fan bases, they're kind of like, you should, stick your head down, do your job, because this is a team. This is a team aspect, and you're not bigger than anybody else. Whereas in basketball, you have more individual opportunities to shine and to have that personality kind of take over. But I'm all for players having fun, and just kind of expressing themselves in the way that they want to do so. And if that can galvanize and lead a team to success, then I'm all for doing that. If we had a player like Baker Mayfield who can, talk the talk and walk the walk, essentially, I'd be all for that. And that's one of the aspects that I liked about him coming out of college. And, I'm glad that he's not shying away from it. And I'm glad that, at least for the city of Cleveland, it's definitely doing more good than bad.
I did not like it. There are a couple reasons why. I guess I'm a little more old school in certain things where I just, it's one thing if he's staring down another player on the team and maybe they had been jawing all day and that kind of stuff happens. I understand that, there may have been something there with Hugh Jackson, but I don't really understand the animosity. I like how you said, John, that he kind of looks to create a villain. Mm-hmm. And maybe that plays into the quote unquote chip on the shoulder thing, right? He was a walk-on at college. He was, he's shorter than most prototypical NFL quarterbacks, all that kind of stuff. And he has used a lot of different fuel, a lot of different villains to become a successful player, especially at the college level, for now at the pro level. And I, if that's what he's got to do, and a lot of players do that, that's fine. I don't really understand the Hugh Jackson thing, because from what I understand, based on reports and things I heard back in the draft, Hugh Jackson actually kind of pounded the table to get Baker Mayfield in Cleveland. Baker Mayfield took over as a starting quarterback while Hugh Jackson was still there. And yeah, Hugh Jackson went to the rival Bengals, but he was jobless. Was he supposed to not go get another job? Especially if one that was offered to him right away where he could support his family in the pros. I mean, was he supposed to say no? So I that's where I sit here and I go, well, why? And the only reason that makes sense is one that you said, where maybe he's just creating a villain for the sake of creating a villain. And maybe he's smart enough to know that this rivalry needs a little extra oomph, because the Browns have been so bad for so long and the Bengals have largely dominated the series lately, that it brings a little extra gravitas and headlines to a rivalry that hasn't really had much going forward. Now, me saying that, I understand how big of a hypocrite I sound, because when the Bengals had players like Chad Johnson, when the Bengals had players that like to talk, a lot of times it was at the Browns' expense. And whether it was sending Pepto-Bismol to Browns players, or whether it was all kinds of stuff that Chad Johnson did, the cornerback checklist, if you remember that one, John, there was all kinds of stuff. So I realize that talking noise or, kind of bragging about certain things, I sound like a hypocrite in saying I don't like it, or I sound like kind of a sore loser in saying that I don't like it. But there was just something about it, just player to coach. I would think there'd be at least a little bit more respect level, especially what happened a couple of weeks ago when they played, and there was more headlines where he just kind of brushed Hugh off. And I don't know. And maybe we don't know exactly what transpired in that locker room and how badly Hugh Jackson rubbed off on some of those players.
And I think that's the aspect that a lot of people just don't quite grasp. Because like you said, if Mayfield truly believes, like, logistically, that Hugh Jackson shouldn't have taken the Bengals job, he's just stupid at that point. I think he's smart enough to realize that Hugh Jackson was looking out for himself, but like you said, like I said, he's just out there to create the common villain for them to rally against. And I think even if the Browns are still, at this point better than the Bengals, they've needed that in this rivalry to actually sweep the Bengals for the first time in what's like 16 years at this point. So there's that, and there's also the aspect that I just don't think that Hugh Jackson just anywhere outside of like Mike Silver is respected by anybody. Like the way that he exited Cleveland, the way that he basically had the blame tour, on his way out, and just the way that he handled things in there, just in the very brief glimpses that we got from Hard Knocks, there was just no indication that he was the leader that was right for just any team. And coming from a program like Oklahoma under Lincoln Riley, even Joe Mixon said about, like, I've never been a part of a losing program before, and he was obviously referring to Oklahoma. Mayfield was a part of that program that obviously had a lot of success in the Big 12. To go to Cleveland and to see whatever clown show that Hugh Jackson was running, I guess he took major offense to that. So I truly don't believe that there's a lot of respect between Mayfield and Jackson, but I also believe that the words about him, shouldn't be taking a job within the division. That's kind of just fabricated to the sense of him just propping him up as something that the team can rally against.
Yeah, and I think also what didn't sit well with me and probably a lot of Bengals fans is it was a little bit of a symbol of, I don't want to say passing the torch, because it's really one season. This could be an aberration. We don't know what's ahead for Baker Mayfield. He could end up having a major sophomore slump next year. Maybe the Browns experience a lot of the injuries the Bengals experience this year, and all of a sudden he doesn't look like the same guy. Who knows who they bring in at head coach, and that can have an effect on him, the offense, all that kind of stuff. Yes, they look like they're headed in the right direction. I'm just saying we don't know for sure what the future holds. But what didn't sit right with me is that bravado is what the Bengals used to have. And as recent as 2015, maybe they didn't show it in the same way that Mayfield showed it, but the talent, the bravado, the confidence, that's what the Bengals used to have. And now they go out there almost seemingly expecting to lose. And that's not a good feeling to have as fans, as you and I who covered the team for CincyJungle.com and on this podcast. It's not a fun feeling I know I feel that, especially with all the people that are out of the lineup. I go into
who doesn't feel that at this point?
Right. So it's kind of like, well, I can only imagine what the players feel like. Now, I guess one bit of good news, side note, you mentioned him just a second ago. Joe Mixon did crack the 1,000-yard rushing mark in this game against the Browns. So the Bengals did have, despite all the struggles, especially on offense, having a backup quarterback for a period of time, they did have a 1,000-yard receiver in Tyler Boyd and a 1,000-yard rusher in Joe Mixon. So at least there are some positives there. Going back to Mayfield quickly, John, there are a lot of rivalries. There are a lot of villains in terms of Bengals fans looking outward into this division, or maybe even around the league, depending on certain fans' viewpoints. But I think most people readily will say, oh, yeah, Big Ben or Antonio Brown or Juju Smith-Schuster. But as Baker Mayfield in 2 short games, do you think he has propelled himself into that conversation as that is now the team's either biggest villain or one of the biggest villains that they are facing and will face going forward?
I think honestly,
I'm saying play and character. I didn't mean to interrupt you. I'm saying in terms of play, on-field play, and some of this stuff, because I'm going to tell you what, John, this stuff isn't going to stop, especially if Hugh Jackson. No. If Hugh Jackson stays, whether it's as an assistant coach, a head coach, whatever, with the Bengals, this stuff's not going to stop. So, I mean, I think we have to keep that in mind.
No, for sure. If Hugh Jackson is out of the Bengals organization, then Baker's going to find someone else to kind of put the target on the Bengals' back. I honestly, from like a fan's perspective, I guess it depends on your opinion of Hugh Jackson, because that's that's the one thing that he's pinning against and putting the slander up against the Bengals team at this point. For fans who don't like Hugh Jackson, I don't think Baker's at that level of hate yet. There's just still a level of jealousy because the Bengals don't have that at the quarterback position, or at the most important position on the team. And they're just jealous that the Browns may finally have that and they don't. But definitely as a talent perspective, he's by far at this point the second best, or yes, I would say he's probably the second best, naturally talented quarterback in the division when everyone else is healthy, ahead of, both Joe Flacco and Lamar Jackson. And honestly, I just think he's just slightly ahead of Dalton at this point, just natural ability. Now, obviously, yes, to sustain that and has to keep growing, but just off of a base, he's shown a lot of things that just Dalton hasn't shown in 7+8 years now. And I think at this point, he has ascended to the point that the Bengals fans and the team has to respect every time that they play each other, just when they play Big Ben, because you can always expect, Roethlisberger to come into Paul Brown Stadium and do whatever do what he does, and they haven't lost there in so long, and now they have to prevent the Browns from doing that exact thing. And where the Browns go from here with Mayfield at a quarterback, what they do with their coaching staff, that's going to be extremely indicative of how they perform moving forward and what their records are going to be like with Mayfield at quarterback. But the Browns are definitely a team with Mayfield at quarterback that will always challenge the Bengals, and the Bengals cannot expect to just sweep them, every single year until they're at that level in terms of head coach and quarterback.
Yeah, I think he's asserting himself as probably the biggest villain that they're now. Obviously, that in a few short days against the Steelers, I could easily change my mind just seeing those guys on the field and doing what they do on against the Bengals, and all the chippiness that always ensues there. But based on the position he plays, based on usually quarterbacks on the field, at least with the exception of really that I can think of offhand, maybe Phillip Rivers a little bit. They're mostly even keeled. They don't really engage in a lot of chatter on the field, and even at the podiums after the game, they kind of just they stick to the kind of coach speak stuff, and he does not do that. For better or for worse, he does not do that, and I think that especially as long as Hugh Jackson is there, I think he's going to be. He is currently making the case to be the Bengals' biggest rival or biggest villain, especially because they're going to be playing him at least twice a year going forward. So, and someone said in the YouTube chat, in order to, who was it? I think it was Holy Moly Donut Shop. The best way to shut Baker up is to beat him, obviously. And he's 2-0 against the Bengals, so he can talk because he's winning, but. He's kind of using that Johnny Manziel bravado attitude, but he's actually translating it to on-field play and production. And it's turning into a product that, as from a Bengals standpoint, has to be pretty frustrating to watch going forward. So we'll see how this whole rivalry, this whole relationship with Baker Mayfield and the Bengals continues. We're going to get out of here with some listener questions. And the first one, since we just talked about resolutions and the quarterback position, John, the Oregon quarterback Justin Herbert, I believe, said he's going to forego the draft and he's going to go back into college to play at Oregon this year, which is a little surprising. But he did have that shoulder injury, I think, towards the end of the year that forced him to miss a little time, and I think he wants to go back and really prove the tape. It might not be the smartest decision on his part, just simply because this is a weak quarterback class. But we did get a question. Let's see who it was from. It was from DI3S3L44. I think it's Diesel44, actually, is if I'm cool enough to read that correctly. With Herbert pulling out of the draft, how does that shake up the Bengals' interest and possibility of taking a quarterback? So this kind of piggybacks a little bit on what I was talking about with the quarterback situation in 2019. What do you think?
So just based off like the last 3 or 4, maybe even 5 years at this point, if you want a quarterback in the first round, odds are you're going to have to pony up and pay for it. And with extra draft picks, that's just the nature of the market now, and how teams who maybe don't end up being in the top 5 initial order, who need a quarterback, they've shown the complete willingness to move up and sacrifice, future first-round picks and multiple mid-round picks of that draft to go up and get their guy. We saw the Rams do that with Jared Goff. The Eagles did that with Carson Wentz. The Texans did that for Deshaun Watson. The Chiefs did that for Patrick Mahomes. Even the Jets did it for Sam Darnold. They only moved up like 3 spots. The Bears did that for Mitchell Trubisky. They moved up like 1 spot. So it doesn't matter where you end up, slotted in the draft order. Odds are, if you want to take a quarterback in the first round and you're not picking first overall, you're going to have to trade up into the top 5 or way earlier in the first round than where you already are to get him. So right now there looks to be like one in Haskins, who's projected to potentially go top 10, and then beyond that there's like Will Grier or Drew Lock, guys that have more questions attached to him. But even if right now you're not, excited about the prospect of either of those two behind Haskins, because I know Haskins is pretty much universally loved at this point, they still have to be open to, they still have to be open to the possibility of him taking over in like a year or two, because, in the past, it's not always those first two quarterbacks off the board that end up being the most successful. Like Deshaun, like Mahomes and Watson were like third and fourth quarterbacks taken. Prescott was taken in the fourth round. I guess it's more of an outlier than anything, but it doesn't always have to be that first guy in the draft class that is like, the surefire best quarterback of that class. There's guys with potential here that can still be good players, and it's just up to the eval and how those guys end up turning out, with their offseason programs and whatever, and depending on, how much stock that they end up improving, where they're going to go. And so, yeah, obviously Herbert, not declaring definitely hurts the class overall, but I think that even with just Haskins being, like the guy that everybody still like agrees on, I think there will still be another, at the very least, quality starting quarterback in this class, and the Bengals have to be open to finding him.
I can't shake the feeling or the thought of what if the Bengals had just drafted one of those quarterbacks last year? Because if they are looking for a quarterback this year, which I don't think they are, but if they are looking for a quarterback early this year, it's kind of funny because then it's a weaker class. And of course, the Bengals just make the wrong decision again, and they wait to get a quarterback in the class that's a lot weaker than last year when they could have done so. But imagine if they just said, you know what, and this is the difference between the Ravens and how they are run and the Bengals and how they're run. They had they have a Super Bowl winning quarterback on their team. Granted, he's older than Andy Dalton, but they noticed some warts in his game. They noticed some aging, all that kind of stuff. And they said, you know what, screw it. We're going to still give him some weapons, and he can play this year, but we're going to take this kid because he's high on our board. We want another quarterback, and that's what we're going to do. So they took a first-round quarterback. Flacco gets hurt. All of a sudden, Lamar Jackson comes in, and they're poised to pretty much win the AFC North. If the Bengals had not been so concerned with Andy Dalton's confidence level or whatever it is that has made them not take a quarterback high in years when we thought they could or should, imagine if they just stashed away a Josh Rosen on their bench or a whoever one of these guys, whichever one of them they like the best. And Andy Dalton, I mean, you have hindsight. You think Andy Dalton's going to start it all year, but you have one of these guys, and all of a sudden now this person comes in, and at the very least, maybe they win some games, but at the very least they get some valuable starting experience, and you can say, you know what, either year 2 or year 3, we're going to give Dalton maybe another year or something, but year 2 or year 3, based on what we've seen, this person is not the guy or this person is the guy, and or could become the guy. And the Bengals would have had, in a season that has been lost, they would have at least had that going for them, right? I mean, they would have had a young quarterback that they could say, you know what, we made the right decision, or, oh boy, I don't know about this. So I wish that they had, for lack of better words, had the stones to draft a quarterback and not worry about ruffling the feathers of the guy they already have in the building, because they want to make the team better. Go ahead.
Unquestionably, because like every year we talk about, how can we improve the team around Andy Dalton, and it always involves, targeting, a multitude of different positions to have, immediate improvements in those. And sometimes it'll take, years for those guys to develop and become assets for Dalton to utilize. If you're drafting a quarterback in the first round, odds are he'll do better with the roster that a guy like Andy Dalton may be struggling with. Like Deshaun Watson, for example. Like, did you see the game that he had against the Eagles? Like his receivers were like injured. He was playing on the road, and he was just making plays by himself. Like even Patrick Mahomes is doing things that we've rarely seen from the quarterback position, and he's just elevating the guys around him. Carson Wentz and Goff have improved dramatically. Even with their supporting cast, they're showing their immense talent. If you draft a guy in the first round, odds are you don't need to fill every need that you have on the roster. Whereas if you have a guy like Dalton, you need the entire roster to be, primed for a playoff run, so he can just, take the reins and just, drive the car that's already, fully equipped to, handle a playoff run. If you have a guy that's uberly talented that can elevate a roster, that eases your whole team building process tremendously. And along with all that, if they do end up drafting quarterbacks that they said they liked, but they weren't interested in taking in 2017, Then you have a guy that, again, you can either, have, prepare to take over for Dalton, who at that point is a bridge, and then take over in year 2 and 3 and not have to worry about the rookie, the rookie struggles of a first-year quarterback, because a guy like Mayfield and I guess Russell Wilson going back to 2012 and even Andy Dalton in 2011, those guys are pretty much they're they're the anomalies when it comes to rookie quarterbacks. Most of the time, it'll take a year for that quarterback to kind of get acclimated in an offense or just in the league in general. And then year 2, we see that production really spike upwards. So the longer you wait to get a quarterback under your belt and in your system, the longer it will be until you can actually contend with him. So if the Bengals don't draft a quarterback until like 2020, we can't expect that quarterback to actually produce at a high level until 2021. Now, he could if the roster is good enough to carry him in 2020, but odds are, he's going to struggle, just like a guy like Josh Rosen has struggled, a guy like Sam Darnold has struggled, and guys like Jared Goff and Carson Wentz struggled in their rookie years as well. So odds are, he's not going to end up being Deshaun Watson coming into this first year. He's going to struggle and he's going to go through the motions in his first couple starts. And the sooner you get that out of the way, the better, the quicker that your franchise can move forward.
Yeah, and I mean I watched the game on Sunday night a little bit. We had a family get together that evening, but Sunday night the Chiefs Seahawks game, and you just see what those two guys can do, and what they mean. Russell Wilson and Patrick Mahomes. That is, you just see. I made the comment to some family members saying, that's just the difference of a guy, who those guys are, and what they can do for their teams. I mean, that's just the reality of it. And, it's not that I don't want – I think Andy Dalton is a great human being. I think he's a pretty good quarterback. I think Marvin Lewis is a good human being, despite some of the terseness in his press conferences and whatnot. I would like to see those guys win. But if they're not winning, right.
You can always swing again. If you fail, you can always get back up again. It's not like being back under the dirt for 5 more years is going to do any more harm than just continuing the same old thing over and over again. At some point, you just have to change it up, and if it doesn't work, try again.
Yep, and in today's NFL, as opposed to when Marvin Lewis first took over as the Bengals head coach, the risk level in terms of financial investment of a first-round quarterback, if they are a bust, it's not nearly as big of a deal. I mean, go look at Baker Mayfield's contract or whatever, compared to what Carson Palmer got as the number 1 pick in 2003. It's night and day. So there's still a risk, but it's far less substantial than it was a handful of years ago. So with the new CBA that was signed. So that's where I don't understand. I mean, I get you don't want to be non-competitive even for a little bit, but I mean, sometimes you got to do that in order to get to a higher level. At any rate, we've got another email, and then we're going to get out of here, John. And it was from John Telly. Interesting, and it does kind of segue nicely from what we were just talking about, but basically talking about, is there a possibility that the plan was in 2018 that this is still a rebuilding year, and that 2019 was going to be what everybody is hanging their hat on? And there's a couple of reasons that John Telly lists out. Basically, number 1, Marvin gets a 2-year deal rather than a 1-year deal. I know the Bengals have an out after 1 year, but why bother with a second year if this was a quote-unquote prove-it deal, especially if he got some rental deals in the past. They had cut veterans like Aloka, LaFell, and Jones, but played rookies in Bates and Price that they usually wouldn't deem ready. They made trades and some free agent signings in the offseason for players that will be with them beyond this year, all that kind of stuff. But they didn't make trades before the deadline in the season when the playoffs were a realistic goal. Did the front office write off this season before it started in the hopes of positioning themselves for a playoff run in 2019? I should say that I don't agree with this reasoning, but wondering what the front office is thinking. And then he also just writes a little thing. To be fair, I'm not someone who thinks Mike Brown doesn't care about winning. I just think he's not very good at it.
That's perfect. like
Yeah.
right there.
Yeah. I mean, I wholeheartedly agree with that last sentence. But your thoughts on some of the points he laid out and this plan that the Bengals have had for 2018 and 2019.
They don't have a plan. They don't have a good one at the very least.
The plan is not having a plan.
like I don't know if they can tell the difference between, you know, like a clear rebuilding year that's hidden behind the propaganda of them being more aggressive. I don't know if they're smart enough to kind of, you know, be a two-faced organization like that. I don't necessarily agree with it, because I think in their minds they were aggressive this offseason compared to 2017 when they let go of their two best offensive linemen and didn't properly replace them in free agency or the draft. And then this year when, you know, like they made the trade for Cordy Glenn, they made the trades to get, you know, Billy Price and obviously Jesse Bates, and then Malik Jefferson as a result of all that. I think in their minds they were more relatively aggressive in their approach.
Yeah.
And then firing a guy like Paul Alexander, who's been with the organization for so many years, to get, you know, a guy who had, you know, quote unquote success with Dallas coaching that line in Frank Pollock. I think in their minds they were plenty aggressive, and I think they were expecting to build, you know, in what has now become a weak division relatively compared to years past, where the Steelers aren't as dominant and the Ravens and Browns are experiencing a facelift of sorts. So I don't agree with that. I think that like regardless of if they believe that they were going to be competitive or rebuilding, that Marvin Lewis always had to say and whether or not he was going to continue coaching, and that hasn't changed. With how the season has endured, and they obviously didn't expect a lot of these injuries to happen, and they've been unfortunate. But you could say that that's an excuse that can give this argument more weight. But I just don't believe that they did. I don't believe that they didn't believe that they could compete this year, and I think they did all that they thought that they could do to make that happen, and it just hasn't happened because their process is extremely flawed.
Yeah, and I agree. And even if they didn't believe it, every team would tell you, "Oh, we expect to compete for a championship every year," right?
Yeah.
I mean, that's the cliche. So, yeah, I agree with you. There are some flaws in some of the logic, and it's not necessarily John Telly's logic. It's just the logic that's been laid out there. Some of the players that they brought in free agent deals are not going to be back next year. Preston Brown is a one-year deal guy. So, and that was supposedly one of their big guys that they signed from the outside. Cordy Glenn, yes. I mean, that was a trade, and they've got him locked up for a couple of years now. But so I find flaws there. I also find flaws in what we just talked about with the quarterback stuff. I would think that if they truly thought, hey, if we get competitive in 2018, if we're close to 2018, awesome, but 2019's the year, I would think they would have explored quarterback last year. I mean, that's the biggest sign of a rebuild, or the biggest, aside from hiring a new head coach, that is the sign of rebuilding. We're going to move forward with a different quarterback. And they did not do that in a very heavily talented class last year. And they said, well, let's just kind of plug a couple of holes here and there. And it temporarily worked in the form of a 4-1 start, but injuries and it being basically a house of cards ended up collapsing. And here we are again for the third season in a row where the Bengals have a losing season. So, and I also would think that if they had the mindset of 2019 as our year, I would think that you wouldn't, I don't know, two straight years of losing seasons, that you wouldn't want to say, yeah, well, we'll have another one and then we'll get there. You know what I mean?
Yeah.
I just, I don't know. I just find some flaws in logic. And I think, John, you hit the nail on the head in that if you were to ask the Bengals, and at this time of year, especially when the Bengals aren't doing well and they've had a string of unsuccessful seasons, there's the open letters and the fan letters and people talking about how their interactions with ticket sales people because they don't want to renew and blah, blah, blah. And that's great. That's their prerogative. But if you see the letters that get sent back by the organization to the ticket holders and all of that, they make these reasons or excuses of, hey, we were aggressive last year. We were just injured. And I don't know. And I think you're going to hear a lot of that stuff. I think you're going to see Marvin back next year. I think, like you said, John, There's going to be Vance Joseph probably in the mix. If he's let go, he's probably going to be the team's defensive coordinator. I'm expecting a move to Hugh Jackson at offensive coordinator, to be quite honest with you. And they're going to try that, and they're going to try and recapture 2015 how they can. And that's going to be their game plan this next year. And then that's probably when it blows up if it does not work, which signs point to inevitably that it will not. But I think 2019 they'll probably be a better result in terms of a record, but I don't see necessarily too many huge differences in terms of a quarterback or a head coach or anything. That I don't know. I think they thought 2018 was not, we talked about this on a recent show, was a retool, not a rebuild, right? Mm-hmm. And I think that they thought they did enough to be competitive and potentially sneak a division crown this year. And they fooled everybody for about a month and a half. And then that was it. So good email by John. Good questions all around. We're a little short on time, so we're going to get out of here. But we appreciate all the listener questions. If you're new to this show, you can get it on iTunes, on Stitcher, on Google Play. You can get all of our stuff on cincyjungle.com, and we are also on YouTube and Art19. So get the show how you can. Thanks for tuning in. Hope you had a great Christmas. Hope you have a great New Year's, and we'll see you on the next episode.